Hello, everyone who's joining. Welcome. We'll just wait a moment or two before we get started. Welcome if you're just joining in. My name is Kristen. I am lead creative strategist here at #paid. We're just going to wait another moment or two and we'll get started with Q today. Great. Okay. Well, we see some people have joined in, so we'll get started. Thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who may be new to #paid, we're a creator marketing platform. And what we do is help brands build meaningful partnerships with creators and cultural leaders to drive performance, creativity, and ultimately long-term brand growth. We're really excited today to have Quentin join us. Some of you may recognize him from our past #paid events where he's really shared insights focused on youth culture and emerging consumer behavior. Known most simply as Q, he's the director of creative intelligence at WGSN and a cultural strategist who specializes in decoding youth-driven cultural and generational shifts. His work translates emerging attitudes and behaviors into very clear frameworks that help global brands stay relevant and connect with new audiences. So today, Q is going to be walking us through Gen Z branding and visual strategies for 2026, exploring how visual platforms are shaping the way that this generation discovers, evaluates, and engages with brands, and the strategies that marketers should be thinking about to connect very authentically with the Gen Z audience. So feel free to pop your questions in the chat. Q, we're thrilled you're here. Thanks so much for joining us, and I'll pass it to you to kick it off.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kristen, for the warm and lovely introduction. Always a pleasure to be in tune with the #paid team. Such an incredible bunch, such a brilliant bunch, really helping to shape the future of what marketing and communication looks like, not just with brands, but with communities across the board. And so good afternoon. Thank you for joining. Just going to reintroduce myself again. I'm Quentin Humphrey. Most folks call me Q, so feel free to call me Q. I'm the director of creative intelligence at WGSN. And that's a lovely title, but my job is to track where culture is going before brands have to scramble to catch up. And so here's the bit that you can't afford to ignore. Gen Z makes decisions at scroll speed. They clock credibility in seconds, and they do it visually. So your look, your language, and your symbolism really do pinpoint your taste level. And it's all being assessed before anyone reads a word of your copy or of your campaign. So today we're going to look at some of the macro and actionable things that you can do to really set yourself apart. So expect a few spicy truths, a few uncomfortable moments, but a lot you can actually use. And with that being said, let's get right into it. But before we kick off, I just want to give you some more context on WGSN if you're not familiar. We're the world's leading trend forecaster, and our job is to spot signals of early change and then translate them into what they really mean for how people think, how they feel, and crucially, how they behave. You know, sometimes people say one thing and then do another, but it's our job to kind of find that sweet spot where there isn't a say-do gap. But we do that by combining human expertise with serious data science. And we've been doing this for more than 25 years and always helping brands stay ahead of shifting consumer culture. But I can spend a full day talking about WGSN. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. My team is the creative intelligence team, and this is our mantra. Strategy without forecasting is just a reaction, and a reaction is expensive. Simply put, strategy without forecasting is a roadmap to nowhere. It's direction without dimension, and that's no good. But our newly established CI team, that is creative intelligence, is how we turn some of our forecasting and foresight into action. It's a mix of cultural forecasting, data insights, and creative strategy, really helping leaders across businesses to spot opportunities, to navigate risks, and also to plan with clarity, because when they succeed, we succeed. On to Gen Z. Here is the fun stuff. Gen Z doesn't discover brands the way that folks did before them. They're not waiting to be told what's cool. They're not persuaded by repetition and volume, and they don't give legacy points for effort, right? Which is why we've seen a downturn in traditional media. Gen Z scans, they sense check, and then they decide. And if they can't see themselves in your world straight away, visually, culturally, emotionally, then they're already gone. And so this is just a quick overarching look at the economic implications of your visual strategy, but also Gen Z as well. They're not a niche. It is a $12 trillion growth engine by 2030. And they buy where culture moves the fastest. Over half of Gen Z are already purchasing directly through social platforms. And most start with a simple filter. Can I get it online? Can I get it instantly? And can I get it without friction? So the fight is not just for awareness, it's also for availability, velocity, and relevance in the feed while they're scrolling. And if you're not shoppable in the moment, you might be invisible. You might feel generic, you might get skipped. So leaders win by building brands that convert at the speed of attention and still feel worth trusting. And for Gen Z, visual language determines discovery, credibility, and again, conversion. So your visual strategy is no longer just a brand exercise. It's actually your revenue strategy. And we'll get right in to our agenda for today. This is where we're headed, from visual strategy to revenue strategy, because design is now performance. You'll hear me say that a few more times today. The Gen Z contradiction, opposites at the same time, and the 5 cultural signals you can't ignore about those branding and visual strategies. And then we'll shift away from that into influence and cultural authority. And then we'll close things out with the CMO mandate for 2026. And that's what to change to stay ahead. Now, before a consumer reads your copy, they've pretty much already judged your brand through color, tone, casting, energy. It's your visual language. And if it doesn't resonate instantly, then the rest of the funnel works harder than it should. And that's why this conversation sits squarely within your growth strategy. And in a feed-driven economy, visual fluency really determines whether you're even in consideration at all. This makes it a growth lever. Design, yes, is a growth lever, not simply a creative afterthought. And nearly half of Gen Z use social platforms as their primary search engine. They don't begin with Google, how we millennials used to. Yes, I am a millennial. I feel like a Gen Z. I feel like an alpha sometimes, but I am a millennial. I use Google still. Gen Z, not so much. And so your brand is being evaluated in under 2 seconds inside a feed next to creators, competitors, and culture itself. And so again, if your visual identity doesn't signal relevance instantly, oftentimes you don't even enter consideration. And so think about design as the front door to growth. What people see determines what they trust. And what they trust determines what they buy. And what they buy determines what you can change. And so that's how we go from visibility all the way to pricing power. And here's why this converts. Recognition removes friction. Less friction means faster decisions, and distinctiveness protects pricing power. This is brand as a business mechanics. So really thinking about, again, going from that visibility starting point all the way to the pricing power, where you can determine what value customers are willing to pay based on how recognizable or easily identifiable your brand is. And Poppy, I'm sure many of us here have had a sip of Poppy. I love it. Much better than some of the sugary beverages I'm highly addicted to, but their visual distinctiveness does real commercial work. It cuts decision time, increases pick and click-through rates. It also builds memory very quickly. And in this sense, packaging becomes an acquisition channel. Love those bright hues here. And we'll get into the bright hues and the importance of the hyper tension that those colors create in just a bit. Nothing Technology, who makes some phenomenal headphones and some really great cell phones as well. They use transparency as a trust strategy, and in a category built on black boxes, showing guts becomes the differentiation. The guts meaning the transparency of their products, of course. But this signals honesty, it signals intent, but also design confidence. They really believe in their stuff. And that's why they're willing to peel back the layers and show you what's actually inside of the products that you're buying. And when your visual identity is distinctive, you reduced the cost of acquisition. Why? Well, because recognition builds efficiency. Performance marketing improves when brand signals are consistent. So visual equity starts to compound. And looking ahead, CMOs must think beyond just brand design and think about brand design as performance leverage, because recognition reduces paid repetition. When people recognize your brand, you don't have to keep showing it to them, because if you're bright like Poppy or transparent like nothing, it becomes your signature. So that's something to think about. What are your brand signatures, and how do you develop those in a landscape that folks are constantly used to seeing online? But at the same time, we're dealing with the risk of aesthetic sameness. And generative AI, we know, is collapsing the aesthetic advantage. So the job now is not more content, right? Even though that can work, volume is a strategy, but now it's about those codes, like I just mentioned. What are those brand signatures that are ownable, repeatable, and unmistakable? Because sameness increases media dependency, and that's a cost spiral, right? When you look like everyone else, you need to be in their face more often. But when you have your own distinct brand codes and brand signatures, you can take a step back and let your brand visual language do the speaking for you. Switching gears to the Gen Z contradiction. Gen Z is fluent in opposites. They want speed and depth. They want irony and sincerity. They want hype and privacy all in the same week. So brands that hold that tension will get the best of this generation. And this is the perfect example of a trend tension. Again, thinking about brands that force a single neat story will fall behind, right? Because it's not about one thing or the other. It's about finding the balance within this trend tension that we know Gen Z likes to lean into. Again, as a generation, they are not a monolith. And so you want to look at them as a group of consumers that like many things at once. That trend tension is something that defines this cohort and will continue to define the visual language that they gravitate towards. And again, they live in a swing. They don't stay in one mode for long. Digital natives, but they're tired of noise, hungry for connection, but also protective of their peace. And they're happy to use AI, but they're ruthless about anything that feels fake or that isn't authentic, right? We've heard that word authenticity come and go. It feels like a buzzword. It feels like it's hard to really pinpoint what is authentic. But again, that's that trend tension. And so the brands that will win 2026 and beyond can hold that tension without even blinking. So your visual identity has to flex. Think high energy, then emotional depth. Clean, then textured. Polished, and then human, right? We always want to feel human because that's what makes us us. That's what makes things relatable. But again, Gen Z isn't one setting, it's a range, it's a spectrum. Older Gen Z, who are maybe more akin to millennials, tend to buy into soft, clean, intentional, edited pieces of content, while younger Gen Z, who are more akin to Generation Alpha, swings to chaos, loud, fast, expressive. So don't build one Gen Z look. Build a system that stretches. Use the soft chaos scale, which you can see here, to match the message to the moment, and then pick the channel that carries it best. One lane gets you polarized, but flexibility will get you that reach that every brand wants to lean into now more than ever. And on to the fun part. This is my favorite part of this presentation, the 5 cultural signals that you simply cannot ignore. Onto the fun, the look, and the feel. And when you look closely at the signals, the return to craft, the embrace of emotional intensity, the appetite for lo-fi honesty, you're seeing a deeper recalibration of trust, number one, right? Beyond authenticity, we want trust, but also this level of identity and how it shows itself, not just in what people are wearing, but also in the brands that they're gravitating towards, in the styles and visuals that are speaking to them. And what's important to note here is that these aren't surface level aesthetics. They're clues to how this generation is deciding what actually matters to them. without further ado, on to the first signal. Handmade is back, and it's doing a very specific job. We want high touch in a high tech world. And we're seeing more craft forward cues across visuals and campaigns, stop motion, claymation, watercolor, airbrush, tactile texture, not for nostalgia, but for differentiation and for a level of human craft, right? We want some level of semblance that a person made this, more or less. And it can feed the flooded feeds that are overrun with AI content. And simply put, craft reads as effort, effort reads as care. And in 2026 and beyond, care will now signal value to these consumers and this generation, of course, that is not one thing or the other. And so this is how brands can look premium in an automated world. And so the takeaway from this first signal is that automation compresses content costs, as we know, right? Generative AI can make things cheaper, but craft protects that perceived value. And it also protects that pricing power, which we know is increasingly important. And one brand doing a phenomenal job is UK-based women's wear brand Peachy Den, who collaborated with an airbrush artist to create a collection inspired by souvenir shops, commonly found at holiday destinations when you're traveling. And this generated both digital and physical marketing assets, which you can see here. Again, it's happening in fashion, but it's also happening in consumer technology as well. Teenage Engineering, the consumer tech brand, teamed up with Bentagable Knits, which is a luxury menswear design collective committed to zero waste. Again, shout out to sustainability. We know not everyone's prioritizing it, but some brands are on the right side of history. And this collaboration was really to craft a unique 1930s style tin dollhouse, which you can see here. And the dollhouse was handcrafted to hold Teenage Engineering's OD11 speaker as part of a campaign celebrating tactile design. Again, things made with our hands, things meant to feel human in an ever optimized AI-led landscape. On to signal 2, mood over messaging, because we know Gen Z scrolls straight past safe. If it's safe, they probably didn't see it. And so they stop for feeling, for edge, for a point of view, right? What is your brand POV? And subcultural codes do the heavy lifting here. So punk, gaming, gothic, ugly, or cute. You don't have to build out a manifesto, but you need a mood that hits that sweet spot, because emotion travels much faster than information does. And in the feed, bland is invisible, right? We've always seen something that looks like something else that we've seen, and we probably didn't pay it any mind. Gen Z is no different. And again, Gen Z can smell safe a mile away, and they stop for nerve, not just nuance. And Mischief is just one brand doing a phenomenal job. We know Mischief is always stirring the pot with their viral items, whether it's the bright red boots or other silly garments that are very fashionable, but not always as functional. But they put a lab-grown diamond in sugar, which is interesting, but it was weird, provocative, and instantly shareable. Vetmon actually handed out free brand tattoos at Coachella. Well, they didn't hand them out, they tattooed them. But again, if you're a super fan, then you lent your time and effort and skin to Vetmon. And then Fortnite dropped some punk avatar skins because identity, as we know, has become product, not just marketing. The point is simple. Mood lands faster than messaging, and brands that commit to that subcultural edge get remembered, talked about, passed on, and even get their brand name tattooed on those super fans. Not telling anyone to hire a tattoo artist, but look at Vetmon, because again, bold, dark, subcultural, it works. And so what's the commercial implication here? Again, safe brands protect their reputation. We know that's true, but intense brands create demand. And this is attention economics 101. On to signal 3, the rise of lo-fi trust. Film is back, as we know. So are camcorders, photo booths, and messy BTS content, which I can't stop watching. I love good behind the scenes stuff. It just makes me feel like I was there, like I'm a part of the moment. And again, this is because polish can feel staged and lo-fi feels lived in. Imperfection reads as honesty, and right now the truth looks very unfiltered. Perfection points to AI, but imperfections read as authentic and trustworthy. And we know trustworthy builds a long time and repeat customer. And so again, that lo-fi is a trust cue. Max shot their Born Famous on an analog camcorder to keep it raw and immediate. And Steve Madden, which you can see pictured here on the right, builds campaigns around throwback tech, flip phones, early digital cameras, iPads. That choice is incredibly strategic. So a little roughness reads as real, and real is what people buy. So again, what is the commercial implication here? A little roughness makes it believable. Believable beats perfect. On to our fourth signal here. Gen Z is running low on battery, and burnout is the baseline. So color starts to do a lot of this emotional work. Think hyper brights that cut through fatigue, that lift the mood, and also signal energy fast. And if used well, color becomes a brand shortcut. It's a feeling that people recognize. It's a position that you can own. Think back to that poppy example that we started with. Color is something that they lean into, and it is something that they have become known for. Those hyper brights, that aura energy, right? Imagine a brand aura maxing. Yes, it is possible when you evoke strategic joy. And Puma Fenty's campaign imagery, Fenty Puma, Puma Fenty, it's a clean example of this strategic joy because the hyper bright palette does the work before you read a word. It pulls you in. It brings energy, it brings optimism, instant cut through, and a tired feed. And with this, color is a brand asset. Again, ownable, repeatable, built to travel and flex across platforms, mediums, whether it's physical, digital, or again, in your text inbox or email inbox. We love it. It can travel. And again, it's something that brands can lean into across the board. But again, thinking about that color palette, because this color, the specific color palette, the hyper brights is carrying the emotional weight right now. And in a landscape defined by burnout and digital fatigue, saturation becomes a signal of vitality. So these brights aren't playful just for the sake of being playful. They create lift. They create memorability. They are instant differentiation in a world where, again, we're just constantly scrolling past adverts. And so what's interesting is if used well, they inject energy into packaging, into retail, into paid social without sacrificing that brand coherence. So again, that color is ever important. What is the implication here? Color is doing the emotional work now. It sets the tone before the messaging lands. So keep that in mind. But taking a little bit of a left turn here onto mysticism, which should be going mainstream this year because Gen Z is leaning into meta spirituality, symbolism, and some of these occult adjacent aesthetics, not as religion, more as identity and rebellion. It's a way to push back on the overly rational, overly optimized world. And visually, that shows up in darker tones, subverted beauty codes, like you can see here, but also that cosmic texture. So those subdued palettes do the heavy lifting here as well. We saw the hyper brights, but also those subdued moody colors as well are going to be something that really wins in 2026. And we're seeing this across product, content, and campaigns without burning out, right? It's subtle, but impactful. And what's important here is that 62% of Gen Z believe in astrology. So 62%, that tells you that the demand is there. Mysticism sells because it offers meaning, identity, and reassurance in an unstable moment. And we know that moment is stretching for a while because we are in a very precarious state right now in the world. Another accelerant here for my film buffs is Practical Magic 2, a film that's landing in September 2026. It's a mainstream cultural moment built on witchcraft, feminine power, and generational mythology with Sandra Bullock and Nicole Kidman returning from, it's a sequel. I mean, the first one came out in the 90s. And again, thinking about a sequel, sometimes there's excitement, sometimes there's conversation. It's all about the mysticism being in the cultural lexicon. And some brands are already doing a phenomenal job of this because mysticism is becoming a mainstream aesthetic and language. And you can see across categories. Justin Bieber's Skylark builds a restorative sci-fi visual world. Simi Hayes turns crystals and minerals into beauty storytelling. And Virayao sells fragrance as an energetic uplift, different products, but same pull. The idea is that symbolism, ritual, and emotion are all a part of this idea of mysticism. So for Gen Z, those codes make brands feel meaningful, not just marketable, right? Of course, we want to be marketable, but we want to be in the memory. We want to be in the conversation, not just a brand that they're looking to purchase sometimes. We want to be in, again, that cultural lexicon. And this is the mysticism palette and practice, and you can use it to build an instantly recognizable world, again, across packaging, retail, and paid social. What is the commercial impact here? Well, energy is now literally a brand claim, not just what you do, but what you radiate, right? What is your aura? What are you giving off as a brand, right? And that's something that we've seen in the meme context. What vibe do I give off? That's now a question that marketers need to be asking themselves about their visual language, about their products, and about their brand DNA as well. So as we close out these 5 signals, what do these winners have in common? Well, first, they feel human, not manufactured. They create emotion, not just information. And they're culturally specific, not just broadly relatable, right? They're not trying to be something for everyone. They want to be something specific for a specific community or a cohort. And at the same time, they build systems that flex so the brand can move between culture without losing itself, which is, again, really important. And that is the playbook for 2026. And on to moving from influence to cultural authority, because audiences can clock a drive-by brand in seconds. Authority comes from the staying power. It comes from showing up when there isn't a launch, listening to the public, evolving with the community, and not just extracting from it when you think there's a moment to earn a couple more dollars or pounds or pesos. So we want to treat creators like collaborators because that's how you get participation. You treat them like media, and yeah, they'll give you a post and move on. But you bring them into your brand world and make them collaborators, and you will see the return tenfold. And most big brands are still treating creators like the last step in their media plan. They brief them, they post, they report those metrics, and then they move on. And Gen Z can clock that pattern almost instantly. And when when they trust momentum, lots of people are telling their own stories, right? They trust the people that they go to the most often, the people that are telling honest and authentic stories. And so that's their own words. What's interesting is that 66% of Gen Z look to brands where people share why they like them. Not just, I got this new thing, but I got this thing and I love it because it made me feel this way. I was able to try it on and reuse it for a different occasion. And so when you build that authority, you have a long-time customer. But if you skip it, then you're renting attention in these short bursts for a campaign, for a launch, for moments that don't have longevity. And at this point, it's important to think about creators who are closer to culture than any brand dashboard, right? They spot aesthetic shifts very early and they test them in public and they scale what sticks, right? They're constantly testing and learning in real time. And that's what makes them cultural infrastructure. It's not just distribution. So when you work with them early, you move at the speed of culture. If there is a micro creator who you think has your brand DNA down in your visual language, jump on it. But if you wait until the right campaign and window, you're going to arrive late. So thinking about creators as cultural infrastructure is a great way to stay ahead and also, again, to move at the speed of culture, which we know is that level of authenticity that Gen Z is craving. Rode, who many of us are very familiar with, built a creator native visual language from day one. Clean, ownable, repeatable, and then they let the community play with it at scale. That's how you compound memory and momentum while sales keep moving. That is the name of the game. It's not just in beauty, it's in heritage brands as well, like Lego, who built an empire through co-creation. Fan builds, design submissions, community shaping what actually gets made. The brand stays consistent, but the expression travels. And when people shape the product, they don't just buy it, they back it. And that's how authority compounds, right? So Road compounding with their visual language and their creator community, Lego compounding with their co-creation and co-navigation of their products. So a question here for you. Here's the test. If creators went quiet tomorrow, would your brand still feel current? Would your product still feel culturally coded? Does your brand still have that same code without someone else translating it? These are some real questions to ask, because if your identity still feels relevant, you're on the right track, because influence should amplify. It shouldn't sustain your authority. So in 2026, the mandate is clear. Don't just rent the culture, be a part of it, build it, create it alongside the most impactful creators at every scale. On to our final section, and this shift is now organizational. Visual intelligence can't sit in one team. It has to run through the entire product, retail, and partnerships team, all the way up to the planning and strategy team as well. And for decades, brands control distribution. Now, Gen Z controls the meaning. They curate the feed, they remix what you make, and they decide what gets carried forward and what gets ignored, canceled, or sometimes, unfortunately, de-influenced. I know probably haven't heard that word in some time, but it's still happening. So that shifts the CMO's job, less policing consistency and more building relevance that holds up in the wild. And what's important to note here is that attention is now aesthetic. People decide with their eyes first, then their words catch up. So the question for brands is simple. Do you have a look that earns the stop, or the content that gets scrolled past? Hopefully it's not the second one. And we're in a bit of a taste shift, because 71% of Gen Z say taste has gone flat and everyone buys the same brands. So that's eye-opening. One, and differentiation is back on the table, and the fastest way to win it is in your visual identity. At the same time, packaging is filmed as a touch point now. We've all seen some really fun unboxing videos across our feeds. People document, they share, and they decide what they think in real time in public. And important to note that 74% of US Gen Z and millennials say that they're more likely to buy from brands that deliver a unique and fun unboxing experience. And so what are some insights for the CMO or for the C-suite to take away? One, premium has been rewritten. Gen Z doesn't just equate value with shine anymore. They need value in taste and restraint and credibility. What things won't you do that will signify that it is premium? Because polish matters, but it doesn't win on its own anymore. That it isn't the only telltale sign that something is elevated, simply being polished, because everything's polished with Gen AI. At the same time, really want to hammer home that sameness is very expensive. And that's because AI is accelerating the visual homogenization of content, fewer distinctive codes. Again, this homogeneity is everywhere, from our fashion aesthetics to our visual language. So when brands look interchangeable, the attention turns into a bidding war. And again, that's expensive. You don't want to do volume and repetition. You want distinct codes that set you apart. And so what is the commercial bottom line here? Simply put, visual relevance has hit a new level, and it also now determines your commercial outcome. It drives discovery, it speeds up that conversion, it protects price integrity, but most importantly, it builds equity that compounds over time. And this is why a visual strategy sits on the P&L now, not just in the brand playbook or the brand guidelines. And so to wrap things up, a few quick key takeaways. One, your visual fluency is commercial currency. If you don't land relevance fast, you don't get considered. Two, culture is moving faster than brand governance. So be flexible and build some visual systems, not just static campaigns, because you want to move with culture, not against it. And the last one here is creators are your early warning system. So use them to stay ahead and build cultural authority that lasts. And one final nugget that I want to leave you with before I let you go is that attention is not going to the loudest brand anymore. It is going to the sharpest one. The brand that reads the room, codes culture early, and shows up with visuals that do the work. That is visual intelligence, and that's what wins next. So in 2026, visual intelligence will separate growth brands from fragile brands. And with that, we have wrapped. Thank you for joining me today. Again, if one thing sticks, let it be this: your visual intelligence is now your growth lever. It is no longer a nice to have. If you want any deeper nuggets, my email is right here. Would love to hear from any of you all. Feel free to drop me a note. I think we have a few moments for some questions here. So I'll take a peek at this chat, see what we have here. I have one from Amono, content creator and videographer. Two questions. Let's see. From a creator point of view, do you think campaign content performs better when creators lean heavily into a brand's visual codes like colors and packaging language, or when we prioritize our own recognizable style that audiences already trust? That is a phenomenal question, Amono, and I think it depends on two things. It depends on the brand, the product, and the timing. I would always opt to lean into your own brand DNA, right? So when you're working with a brand, how do you take that brand and those brand codes and put them through your own creator lens? And sometimes it's vice versa. How do you take your codes and your lens and put them through this brand funnel? There isn't one path forward. I think it depends on the product, the launch, the timing, and the medium. But I always say that is something to be considered before the content comes out. If you're going through their funnel or vice versa, there's more power in leaning into the creator's funnel, but we know that isn't always possible with certain brand guidelines. Another question. Wow, you're on fire today. Heard you say nearly half of Gen Z uses social as a primary search engine and that brands are evaluated in under 2 seconds in the feed. For creators, does that change how we should think about the first few frames of a video in 2026, especially on TikTok? Should we focus on less traditional hooks and more on instantly showing up in visual branding? Absolutely, yes. Hooks are still incredibly powerful, and that will bring back a repeat watcher, a repeat listener. But that first visual look will hook someone instantly. And if they don't come back, they were already hooked and they will have watched your video. So they're doing two separate things. That hook, again, will hook someone and they'll keep coming back. They'll likely share it. But the visual will get them instantly and they'll be there. And if they come back with a strong hook, that's even better. But I'd say that traditional look of going for the hook first, I think opt for something that is sharp, that is eye-opening, that is grabbing their attention in the first 2 seconds. That is a winning formula. Heidi, will this deck be shared out after? The presentation, no. The recording, yes. So you can go back to #paid and continue to watch this because the deck is cool, but my lovely voiceover is what really brings this to life. A question from Charles. Do you have any tips for helping C-suite understand that socials is not the last thing to think about on the media creative strat, i.e., let's recut the TV spot for social? Yes, absolutely. I think we just have to look at the figures of where traditional media is going. Look to the fact that there has just been a massive consolidation of traditional media from CNN to CBS. All of the Paramount conversations are pointing to the fact that if media is consolidating like that, then we should look to decentralized platforms, i.e. platforms that have their own audience and their own way of communicating to communities. And so traditional media, again, not to get too granular, but traditional media points to specific generations. Gen X, boomers, some millennials. Again, traditional media was ultimately powerful and was sort of the end-all be-all. If you saw it in the New York Times, that determined your POV. But for a younger consumer, consumers who are, again, TikTok native, some of them are AI fluent, they aren't as easily tricked by fake news. It is the socials. So simply put, I would point to the data that shows clearly that traditional media isn't nearly as impactful for emerging cohorts and for emerging consumers. So if we're after Gen X and boomers, by all means, let's go for the TV spot. If we want the future consumption, again, think about that 12 trillion figure. Again, that's the spending power that this cohort will have by 2030. If you want a piece of that $12 trillion pie, let's think of social first. So that's just one nugget, Charles, that you can throw into the C-suite bonnet to help them understand that this is not an afterthought. This is the start of how we start to build our community. And again, we know that the old way of working was looking at the 4 Ps: product, promotion, place, all those things were the old way of looking at it. But let's look at the 4 C's. The content, which creates community and then builds culture, which is how you're going to get your commerce. Let's move away from the 4 P's, closer to the 4 C's. And question from Kristen: do you feel these recommendations translate to the public education, organic, and awareness space? Absolutely. I think we're seeing a lot more cause creators emerge, and that's simply because these are creators who you trust more. There are so many caveats with this as well, because with creators, we know many of them are incredibly educated and are speaking from a place of authority, while others are not. And so there is a risk we run where we are listening to or trusting creators who might not have the credentials to be speaking on specific things as it pertains to STEM or other really important conversations that we likely need leaders who have some educational or background or some credentials to speak on specific topics. So short answer, yes, these recommendations do translate to public education, organic awareness spaces, but also with a caveat to make sure that we're working with creators who are playing by the rules and, again, producing content that actually has weight and is not funneling misinformation. I think that is all the questions. Those are all the questions that we have today. I do want to thank you all for your time. This has been great fun. Really looking forward to doing this again. And again, anytime that I can spend any moments with the paid team, they are a phenomenal group, really creating the landscape of tomorrow for creators. And so if you are in cahoots with them, double down. If you are not, find ways to get closer with the paid team, because they are really creating some groundbreaking work in technology that is shifting the way that we think about creators, creator partnerships, and also brand and visual language. So with that said, I hope everyone has a phenomenal rest of their Wednesday. I bid you farewell and hope everyone has a great rest of their week. Until next time, I bid you all farewell. Bye now.